Hello and welcome back to EGX Rezzed Digital. I'm James Batchelor, Editor-in-Chief of GamesIndustry.biz, and this is How to Be a Game Developer. Over the next hour, we'll be looking at various routes into games development, the skills and experience needed, and we'll be getting advice from established studios on how you, yes you, can find a career making games. This panel is actually part of our Get a Job in Games month over on GamesIndustry.biz, where we're posting daily articles and even some podcasts on how to get some of the most wanted roles in the industry. So once you've finished watching this panel, head over to GamesIndustry.biz and our Academy section to find out more. For today's discussion, I am joined by a panel of lovely developers. We have got Duyga Chakmak, Project Technical Director from Creative Assembly, James Green, Lead Game Designer from Creative Assembly, and Theodore Ems, Games Programmer, Sumo Digital. Now, I've rattled through those names and job titles fairly quickly, so let's introduce ourselves, and why don't you guys tell us a little bit more about the role that you have and what it actually involves. So, Duyga, let's start with you.
Yeah, hello. Thank you, James. And yeah, at the moment, I'm a project technical director at CA. And previously, before that, actually, I started at CA as an artificial intelligence programmer, like around 5 years ago, I guess. I worked on Total War, and that position involves programming non-player agents' behavior in the game, like how are the non-player agents make their decisions, for example. And after that, I moved on to my current job, which is a project technical director. And at the moment, I'm overseeing the general technical direction of our next unannounced historical tentpole game. On one hand, I'm leading a team of amazing programmers, and on the other hand, I'm setting the technical direction and helping them solve technical problems.
Nice. James, what do you do?
Yeah, so I'm currently lead game designer at Creative Assembly. So I'm working on our new multiplayer shooter project, which is sort of semi-announced. We haven't really said much about it other than just roughly the premise and that it's in development. So I'm working on that at the moment. Obviously, I can't say too much about that project. Previously, I've worked on Total War, I've worked on Halo Wars, I've worked on Alien Isolation, and I've done a mixture of sort of map design, systems design, level design, NPC design in the past. So I've kind of jumped all around different areas of design. Yeah, that's kind of the quick version.
Nice. And Theodore, what do you do?
Hello, I'm a games programmer, as you said, and this is actually my first job in the games industry. Before this, I did a theoretical physics degree, and I worked as a web developer and a data scientist. And then eventually, I came here, and I've been here for a year now, and I've been really enjoying myself. And I'm working on an unannounced game that I don't know what I'm allowed to say about, so I'm just going to leave it at that.
They probably don't explain that. Like when you want to become a games developer, how much time you will spend not talking about what you do because you're not allowed. Let's delve a little bit deeper into each of your careers then. Like, and we'll start with you, Theodore. Like, because overall, we want this conversation to be about how you get to the positions you're in. So, like, where did your career path lead? Like, this is your first job. So, how did you get here? What was your experience before this?
Well, as I say, I started off with the technical educational background doing physics, and I think that was probably one of the main reasons that I was successful getting here. I did, because physics is very relevant to a lot of games programming. It's involved often, in certain specializations at least. And then I think the experience programming in a team as a web developer is another indispensable skill, and then data science. There are still things that are relevant, but it's probably the least relevant part of my experience. Yeah.
Okay.
I hope that answered the question.
That works. That's great. James, how did you get to where you are?
So I've been a game designer for I think it's 15 years, 15, 16, something like that, all at Creative Assembly. So I started as the job title was scripter, but it was kind of like a junior level designer. So I worked on a game called Viking Battle for Asgard, which I don't really think anyone remembers, but it was quite it's an interesting little sort of hack and slash game. That was sort of in the late thousands that came out. So I worked on that initially. That team, we then started looking at a bunch of prototypes, which didn't end up getting made. I then switched over to Total War, which is so an important point about CA is we have kind of lots of quite separate teams. So the Total War team is quite separate to the team that did Alien Isolation and some other games. So I jumped over to Total War. I worked on a number of Total War games, so Shogun 2, Napoleon, a couple of others. I was primarily a map designer, but I did a lot of sort of battle systems design as well, a little bit of campaign design. I then moved on to Alien Isolation. We worked on that. That had a really long development, so it's about sort of 4 or 5 years. So I was a level designer on that game. We then did Halo Wars 2, which is a bit more of a traditional kind of RTS. So I designed all the kind of units and factions and base buildings and things for that game. We then did a kind of like a Total War CCG / tactics game. It was primarily with our Chinese partner NetEase, part of some kind of collaboration with them. So I was the lead designer on that, and now I've moved on to our current unannounced, semi-announced the multiplayer shooter project, where I'm looking at the NPCs. Okay.
Nice, thank you. And there you go.
Yeah. So me getting into industry, it wasn't actually very easy, because I started studying computer science and engineering like more than a decade ago now. Oh God, I'm getting old. Anyways, then I was in Turkey, and there wasn't any games industry in Turkey, but I really wanted to do games. But I did my master's on AI and ready to go, but I couldn't find any job. So I derailed a bit. I did work in web development a little bit as well, and then I worked in a robotics company in Turkey. But then one summer I met with one of my friends, a good friend, Sebastian, who was working in a video games company, and they had like this indie group that they were doing their games in their free times. And they said, oh, we actually need another programmer. Why don't you come and join if you really want it? I'm like, oh, of course, Then I started working on that game like day and weekends and so on, learned quite a lot from that bunch of people. And it's made me want to work in games more, and started to look into how can I get into the industry. And I had this great idea that came to me, like, okay, if I go to a game AI conference and start meeting people, then I can get some connections, and it might be the way to lead into the industry, which worked quite well. I went to a Game AI conference in 2015 in Vienna, and I stopped at Creative Assembly's booth. There was Sophie. She was amazing, and we just started talking. She asked me what I'm interested in. They had a AI opening, and I said I was interested, and luckily all the AI team was already there as well in the conference. So I met with my then lead and the team, and they flew me over after for a bunch of interviews, and they offered me my first job, which I started.
Nice. Let's get a bit more into the nitty-gritty of your actual jobs then, and how people can get them. So, I mean, we've got a technical director, a game designer, a programmer here. So they're three kind of very different disciplines. Like, what skills do people need for your jobs? And I'll put this out to the floor. Like, let you guys jump in rather than picking on people. That's where no one volunteers. Okay.
We're just trying to be polite.
James, go first. Go for it.
So the question is, what skills do people need to get a job?
In game design, yeah.
in game design, I would say, and perhaps the other two might disagree, but I would say game design has maybe the least clear path for sort of how you get to be a game designer, because I feel like there's kind of lots of routes in, but I think the one thing they all have in common is I think for a game designer, I think a lot of it is just, this is going to sound strange, but you need to prove you have the ability to kind of make games and execute on ideas. And so I think the advice we often give people who want to become game designers is basically just demonstrate you can make games and make them fun and kind of deliver on that. And, in any way you can, like, mods, making your own maps for existing games or board games even, or making your own little indie projects or anything like that. So I think that's what we look for primarily in game designers, and I think that's kind of the most obvious route in, is just the demonstrating the ability to make games and actually execute on them as well. Like, don't just have ideas and make design documents and things like that. Actually, deliver. It's better to deliver on kind of a small idea than it is to have a huge design document that's like, here's the perfect, like, I don't know, MMO that needs 1,000 people to make. It's actually much better to just like have a small project and kind of deliver that. And then I'd say, and the other part of it is, when you are a game designer, probably the most important skill and maybe the most underrated skill is probably communication, because as a game designer, especially in sort of big teams or AAA games, but even in smaller teams, game designers can't really make anything on their own. They're the most reliant on other disciplines. So a lot of it is about bringing in people from other disciplines and being able to motivate them and explain kind of what's needed and keeping everyone on target. Yeah.
Okay. We appear to have temporarily lost
yeah.
Doigo. So, Theodore, I think you're up.
Okay, cool. Well, so, I mean, it sounds obvious, but to get a job as a programmer, you have to be good with computers. Yeah, and obviously you need to learn how to code. I'd say games programming is actually really quite hard. So you need to be quite a solid programmer. And then I think another under sort of appreciated skill with programmers in particular is communication. Like it's really important to be able to write code in a team and like coordinate with other people and make sure that when you write your bit and they write their bit, they're going to play with each other nicely. So yeah, that's, I'd say, probably the core skill set.
Nice. Programming is like one of the few parts of game development I've attempted, like really like far back in the day with things like Basic, and I've dabbled in a little Unity, and like when you can break a game by having a semicolon out of place, it's definitely not a discipline for me.
That's right. We just get red squiggles when it's semicolon, so that it takes a second to fix that one. It's when there are no red squiggles and you hit go, and then either nothing happens. That's probably the most frustrating one, because there's no clue. Like, what do you do now? Or when most of the time it just doesn't do what you were expecting it to do, which is another frustration. That's like 80% of programming.
Nice.
Probably.
Is there a programming language you recommend that people try and experiment, try and learn if they want to improve their chances of getting a job?
I'd actually recommend that they pick a game engine, probably.
Okay.
And then each engine kind of has its own language, but we use Unity a lot, and that involves C#.
Okay, that makes sense. Doigo, welcome back.
Hey, sorry about that. My internet went down for a bit of time for no reason.
The joys of remote events. What skills are required for your role?
Yeah, okay, so I actually would like to build over what Theo said, because technical director is essentially usually comes from a programming background, and I agree with Theo about the things that he said. And even with the second one, I want to add one more thing. The communication is underrated, and it's really important within the team and with others as well, because you're a programmer, but you build systems based on what designer wants. So you need to be able to understand what they say, and you need to be able to communicate what are the restrictions or what are the technical difficulties with the desired functionality, for example. So I definitely agree that that's very essential. So for the project technical director role on top of it, this job is usually not an entry-level job to the industry, mainly because you need game development experience, because it mainly requires some experience with the current game development technologies or the workflows. Yeah, but just to sum up what it requires is that it's sort of has two sides, I can say. One is the technical side, and the other part is the leadership side. So in the technical side, one needs to understand the overall game development from a technical perspective. Being a good programmer, having a good programming background is a must. And then typically in different areas of game development is also would be ideal. If you worked on a little bit on AI, for example, and then graphics or physics and so on, then you have a better overall round understanding of what is happening in different departments. And then the second part is the leadership side. Excuse me. And yeah, that requires building on the people skills we just discussed, and yeah, leading your team and understanding what their needs are, what their passions are, or what they need to develop and go to the next level is very important.
Nice. We've covered three quite key disciplines there, but there are so many different disciplines in games development. Like it's no longer the case of like I'm going to be a games developer. That can mean absolutely anything. Wonder if you guys can give us a bit more insight into the other type of roles, like both on your team and kind of around the studio. Like what other areas of development are there that people can look at getting into as a career?
Can I jump in?
Yes.
I mean, the one that really sticks out to me is QA.
Yeah.
Because it's a good entry level position, I think, for quite a lot of people as well. I think a lot of people who I know in the games industry did start off in QA and then move into other roles. So yeah, that's a really good one, and that's basically just testing games, like, which sounds like a lot of fun, but it's a bit more. It's quite repetitive. You know, it's like, oh, we've added all these power-ups. We need to check they all work. So you have to then grind through the game and try all the power-ups and all the combinations and make sure that it doesn't break. So that's a really important job.
A friend of mine was QA for years, and he said like it was really interesting because you got a really intricate look at a very specific part of a game. He said he would play the same level of, I think he was working on a shooter, and he'd play the same level over and over and over again and be writing bug reports and like trying to break the game and writing where he couldn't write. And he said he got to the point where he was like, I don't really want to play any other shooters. Happy to play other games, but I didn't really want to play shooters anymore. So it's yeah, I hear QA is like it's a good entry level, but it can be quite intense, more so than people expect. And what else? That's another kind of that's an ideal entry level. But like, what other kind of positions can people kind of aspire to become? Like right up there, like I'm thinking of things like I've got producers, creative director, narrative director, writers, artists, audio experts. Like there's so many different parts of games development. Like any others you kind of recommend that are interesting careers to look at?
Yeah, as you said, there's like many different areas like audio and so on. And there's another bit that I think is really important is the tooling side of things. For example, these people are the people who doesn't write the game itself, but they provide different tooling for artists, for designers, for programmers. Basically, their goal is to make their life easier, and their goal is to provide these different tool sets so that the artists can easily develop things in a shorter time, or programmers easily can analyze their data, for example, or their code, so that they can find the bugs much easier and so on. And apart from that, I also want to draw attention to non-developer side sort of positions, because all the programmers, designers, and all those people are the people who does the game itself. But also we have a very large other teams that support the developers. For example, there's user researchers or data scientists who focus on what our friends, what our players, not friends, well, they're friends as well, what our players like, what makes them happy, so that if we can understand that better, we can develop better games in general. Or we have a lot of HR positions, for example, recruitment, operations, who makes sure the developers are okay, they're happy, they have the best team members in the team, so that they essentially look after us. They make sure we are content and we are good, so that we can only focus, we can focus without worrying about anything else to develop better games. So these sort of positions are also things that are not under the spotlight, but very essential for game development, I think.
Anything to add, James?
Yeah, I was going to say it's worth mentioning that even within a discipline, there can be lots of quite specialized roles. So just if obviously lots of games have artists, but I mean these days especially, there's usually quite a lot of heavy specialization within that. So character artists, VFX artists, animators, even technical artists, which might not even make any art at all, but make the tools or make the pipeline or do the rigging or things like that. And I think it's maybe different when I first moved into the games industry, but now in particular, I feel like even within those disciplines, you'll specialize quite quickly and like kind of stick within your speciality. Yeah.
Well, let's touch on that then, because as you say, like so many roles are quite specialized and you need quite specialized skills. Like how do aspiring games developers find the right speciality for them? How do they decide what they want to focus on, given that focusing on that can potentially kind of cut them off from other areas, for example?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I mean, I guess if you're already in a position where you I want to make games, I feel like at that point maybe you start to kind of home in on the area you're interested in. But it can be difficult to a lot of people don't realize there are animators that never animate. They just do the kind of pipeline and the tools and the rigging and things like that. I think, I would probably say you just have to do a lot of your own research, I think, to kind of find out what these positions are and things like that, because you kind of need to be forearmed with the knowledge that a concept artist is totally different to a VFX artist, and there's kind of almost no crossover. Because if you don't realize that, you might think, oh, it's just doing games art, right? I really like how games look and things like that. That's the side that appeals to me. But yeah, it is really important to understand that those disciplines are, they're kind of polar opposites. So yeah.
Can I add to that? I was thinking, my experience with it was that I sort of tried a bit of everything. And that was really enjoyable because you get a real feel for the things that interest you. And those are the things that you're probably better off doing because, you'll be more motivated to do them.
That makes sense. Well, let's dive a little bit further into that as well. Because that can pick up on something James was saying there, the idea of becoming a games artist, because I like the way that games look. What are some of the common misconceptions about getting into games development? We touched on QA earlier. It's it's just testing games, but it's not, is it? It's loads of bug reports and it's a lot of paperwork, and there is work involved. Games journalism, people just think I play games and write about them. And they're half right. I do write about them. What are the misconceptions that are out there about games development? What myths need to be dispelled before people seek a career in this? anyone.
I think just that it's a hard field with a huge number of specializations, and nobody is a complete game development package. Everyone's got a specific subset of skills, and things take a long time as well. That's one of the truths about game dev. Things do take a long time. I think that's all I've really got to say.
Okay. Do you go?
I have one, which might maybe not completely a misconception, but from students or from people who want to get into the industry over time, I usually have two different sort of vibes. One is some of them, it touches actually what Theo said as well, that they think they need to do a bit of everything a little bit. They do a little bit of programming, but then they say, oh, but I can't, do art, or they do a bit of design and so on. So they basically try to learn a bit of everything to do a one-man game. And then on the other hand, there's other people who just dives into one very specific topic and doesn't know anything about the rest of the things. So I think both approaches might be okay in the scale, maybe not super ants, but somewhere in between. But maybe one thing to look at there is actually what sort of studios you want to work in, because there's so many indie studios, for example, requires you do a little bit of everything, right? Or if you're a programmer, you would need to do a bit of physics, a bit of graphics, a bit of AI maybe. So it's more generalist sort of approach. Whereas in more two-player studios, because there's so many different things to do, people tend to specialize a bit more and dive deep and say, I'm an AI programmer and I don't really do anything else. So probably, before thinking it's either this or that, if someone wants to get into the industry, thinking about what's the end goal, what do you want to do? Do you want to work in the studio as a generalist, which has its own challenges and its own BTs, or you want to work in a two-player studio with a dive into more specialism, which has its own challenges and own benefits as well. So I think that bit needs to be thought and be cleared a bit. Yeah.
So that's something I was going to ask about, because there is that debate. I've certainly heard differing views on this over the years. Some people who want to be game developers, particularly like graduates, younger people, like they come straight out of university, or they don't go to university. They're just in their spare time. They learn an engine. They team up with some friends, and they form an indie studio straight away. And they just launch into like running their own studio. And as you say, like wearing many hats and dabbling in a bit of everything. There are some people who suggest that actually getting a job at an established studio is the better course, because you get a lot more kind of experience, you get training, you get larger published games under your belt. I kind of want to get your thoughts, like each of you, on which is not necessarily the better route, because it can depend, but like thoughts on the advantages and disadvantages of launching straight into, right, I'm going to make indie games with some friends, versus actually trying to get a career, establish a proper, quote unquote, proper studio first.
I would say the issue with kind of forming an indie studio sort of straight out of school or whatever is that most indie projects don't succeed, or they come out and not many people play them, and I think that's something that's forgotten a little bit, because the story that's often kind of, or the picture that's often painted is something like a Minecraft that was made by a couple of people and then it becomes the biggest game in the world. Obviously, the vast majority of indie games don't come out, or come out and have no players. It's only the sort of 0.0001% that become huge hits. So it's important to be really realistic. If you kind of set up an indie studio with your friends or your classmates or whatever, that it's kind of like expecting to win the lottery a little bit. It's it's the advantage of working at like a studio or taking more established route into the games industry is that it's a lot more stable, it's a lot more secure. You know, you'll get a salary, you won't kind of, you know, bet the farm on your kind of perfect project. I think it's different if you I don't know if you're going through university or have a day job and kind of having you know, like an indie project in the background. That's a bit different. That's probably quite a good way to learn skills or leverage that into a job. But you know, the idea of just forming an indie studio and having a hit is kind of, you know, it doesn't happen very much.
Yeah, I guess I'd say sort of the same thing really. If you're going to get into indie game development, then you shouldn't be motivated by the promise of success, because it's very unlikely, but you should do it because you enjoy it, and actually it's good experience. So you might not make loads of money making a game, but it will help you get into the games industry in general.
We talk about the idea of people coming, forming these indie studios like straight out of school. That's probably a subject we should touch on, which is education. Like, there are a lot of university courses into various aspects of game development now. Would you, kind of touching back on your own experiences as we did at the start of the session, like, what's the benefits of going into education to learn this stuff versus kind of, you know, teaching yourself online or just trying to gain the experience kind of prior to getting a job? Like, what education, if any, do you recommend people get before seeking a job in games development, particularly in your own career, in your own roles?
I'll just jump on this one. I think the education, you know, whether it's a formal education or whether you teach it to yourself via online courses or documents and so on, especially in programming, it is highly situational. I mean, it really depends on the person, and it really depends on how you learn best. And when we hire people, we don't really care whether, you know, they hold a diploma or not, because at the end of the day, programming is a very demonstrable skill, and you can just spend a few hours with someone and see what level that they're on very easily. And for what sort of things to learn, I think for programmers, the most important thing at the beginning is the language itself. Again, deciding what way to go. If it is like AAA studios, for example, C++ is a great start, because we still have in-house engines written by C++. Or if you're more thinking about middle size, or maybe not, it's not even about size, to be honest, or in the studios, then as Theo mentioned before, learning a engine is a great way to go. So then it would be probably C# if it's Unity, again C++ if it's Unreal, and so on. But knowing your language really, really good is important. It's not just about a tool. It's not just it is a tool in the end, but how well you use that tool makes a big difference when it comes to game programming. And then it has layers on top, right? Then if you want a specific specialization like graphics, AI tools, whatever, then learning the techniques, learning the use cases, learning the approaches that is used there is really important. But in the end, I think in programming, it all comes to practice and make use of all those knowledge over and over again, just making your own projects, making your own things, and fail and iterate, retry, try another approach, iterate, and just put hundreds, thousands of hours in it. That's essentially, I think, what's needed, whether you have a formal education, you teach it to yourself.
I suppose one thing that you just made me think as well was with regards to like picking a language. I think you can pick any language really, and learning the language that whichever studio you end up in uses is a lot easier once you've got the background of a couple of languages under your belt, sort of thing.
Nice. Let's look at on your specific fields again. What is the secret to kind of standing out? Like I had a conversation recently. There are more graduates, for example. There are more graduates looking for jobs in the games industry than there are jobs in the games industry. So how do you stand out? How do you set yourself apart from the competition when you're trying to land not only an entry level role, but like a more senior role, like like the ones that you guys have?
I mean, just on the game design side, I mean, the people we tend to hire, and you're correct, like for entry level positions, we get a lot of applicants because it's kind of entry level jobs don't come up that much, so the competition is really fierce. The candidates that stand out generally have just for game design, they've just made a lot of games, kind of like I said earlier, but they've made their own maps, they've made their own small projects, or with kind of friends or university classmates or whatever, or they've made board games. And the ones that stand out have made a lot, and of those, there will be a few standouts. And I think really, for entry level game design positions, that's what will make you stand out. And even the candidates that have done game design courses, which is not everyone, but is increasingly common. Again, that alone won't sort of get you in the door, but if you've done a lot of stuff on top of that, just made a lot of projects, and have executed on ideas and explained why you got to where you got in your personal projects. That's the kind of thing that will make you stand out. And then another thing I think is if you're going to do personal projects, which you should, is finish them. I think a lot of people underrate the idea of, oh, I kind of had this really cool idea and I kind of made it and I got 80% of the way there and then I kind of got bored of it, but look, I still showed that I did it. And they kind of underrate what the kind of last 5, 10, 20% can mean. Like it's maybe a cool idea that you did a lot of work on, to actually kind of finishing it and putting it out there. Even if kind of no one plays it, you learn a lot in the kind of last sprint.
How about yourself, Theo?
It's a hard question. I suppose to stand out, there are lots of things that can make you stand out, I suppose. But mostly I just think you need a little bit of everything. As I say, as a programmer, having some sort of specialism obviously is very useful if it's relevant to the games industry. I've already mentioned being a good communicator, but I think that's the sort of thing that comes across in an interview, isn't it? Like, you just get a feeling that someone is a good, speaker. I think, what else as a programmer? That's difficult. Your personal projects, again, like even as a programmer, like I imagine, I don't know, but I certainly do. Most programmers have got an awful lot of personal projects on the go floating around. Just being able to talk about them and how they're relevant and just having evidence that you've spent the thousands of hours of programming that it takes to be a good programmer. It's probably another really important thing.
There you go.
Yeah, not much to add here really, but I'll just quickly reiterate what Theo said. Usually when I interview for people, I really like seeing a GitHub account. I really like seeing, their projects, their code, and their submission timeline, and seeing over time how they improved as well. And what are the projects that interest them? Not just, in school we did this, in school we did that. What I'm most interested in is what drive them to do that specific project as well, rather than it's being a requirement for school. So yeah, when someone is applying, if there's a GitHub account, that usually gets me look at that CV in a little bit more detail.
Nice. We are getting on for time, so I'm going to limit myself to 2 more questions. And thank you both. Thank you all for your time today. Quite a broad one. Like, how have you found working in the games industry so far? Like, has anything surprised you? Anything like met or not met expectations so far?
Well, I sort of heard that the games industry was quite cutthroat, almost like Hollywood, sort of really intense and hard. But I don't know if this is true at all studios, but the studio I work for is really lovely. It's a really nice atmosphere. The people are really nice. They're really understanding. So yeah, I was expecting it to be more. I mean, I worked in finance before this, so I was expecting it to be like that, but it wasn't anything like that. Because the people are nice. They like games. They're fun people. Yeah. So yeah, that was the surprise. It was a pleasant one.
Yeah, definitely for me it was the same. It's really a nice environment to work at CA, and again a positive surprise for me is the how multidisciplinary the environment is. So again, before I worked in web or robotics, it was more engineers and more technical people, whereas in games, you communicate with artists, you work with the designers and all the different disciplines and all the different minds, and it's a very collaborative environment, and there's a big freedom to express yourself and understand all the other aspects and so on. I think that's one of my biggest happy surprises when I came first in the industry.
One of the things for me was I sort of before I worked in the games industry, I thought especially with a long running series like Total War, for example, you sort of assume there's a formula for how you make a good Total War game, and actually there really isn't. Making games is really difficult, and there isn't kind of a set of rules you can just follow to make a really good game, even with a long running franchise or even like in an established genre or something. It's actually, part of it is because you want to do different things each time and push the boundaries and things, but there really isn't a formula. I think if you're coming into the games industry, that's maybe quite nice, because that if you start working on games, you can bring something, and you can things can be done differently. There's no like, this is how we're going to make this game, and that's how it's going to be. It changes a lot, and there isn't a kind of a recipe.
Nice. Okay, last question. This one's for viewers. People who've been watching the session, it sparked ideas for them. They're like, "Yep, actually, yeah, I think I can do this. This would be interesting to me." They are in another tab, frantically googling, "How do I learn Unity or Unreal?" How do you begin your game development journey? Like, where do you start? What's like the one advice you would give to people? So, right, you have finished watching the session. This is the first thing you should do to try and become the game developer you want to be.
I personally feel like it's just about the project you've done. So start with a small, very simple project and make the next project slightly more complicated, and just keep growing like that. That's really all you can do.
Don't go straight to your I've got this one idea for this perfect, amazing game. Don't do that first, because the thing you do first will be terrible. Probably the first 10 things you work on will be terrible. You can get to your perfect idea in the future. It's fine.
Yeah, and I would add on top of those really good ideas that at the same time, also try to think about what you really want. What's your passion? What sort of games do you want to work? Where do you imagine yourself? And then try to backtrack from there, and try to find the little milestones. Try to find the little things, little steps to go towards that. But I think imagining what sort of games you really love to play, you really love to build, is the first thing to do. Then you can build a way towards there.
And on that optimistic note, that is all we've got time for. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're watching, thank you very much to our panel for giving up their time today. There'll be more live stream goodness from EGX Rezzed Digitals over the coming days, and you can find more careers advice and information on getting into the games industry throughout our Get a Jobs in Games month. I definitely need to finish this. Get a Job in Games month over on gamesindustry.biz. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.